As I'm preparing to talk to you today about proactive mental wellness and transforming our approach to mental health, I'm sure there's a phrase that's already coming to your mind. That you're thinking, oh, I know she's going to talk about this phrase, because everybody talks about this phrase when it comes to mental health. It's all over social media, it's at work, in those mandatory meetings, and we get it. But it often feels difficult or impossible to even implement, because it goes against everything that we've been taught and how to operate. And so as a licensed mental health professional, I know that when I mention this phrase, I get the inevitable eye roll and heavy sigh. Good old self-care. I heard you say it. Good old self-care. Massages, bubble baths, treating ourselves at the mall, sipping margaritas on the beach in the Caribbean. The usual things that come to mind when this phrase is seemingly everywhere. And while yes, the majority of us can recognize and understand that the general premise of just taking care of ourselves is much more than these things, we still fall short. But is it okay to be so overly consumed with this concept? Should we be so obsessed with self-care? A world in which self-care has to be such a trendy topic is a world that is sick. Best-selling author Broderick-Royes' insightful words ground us in our discussions for today, shedding light on the paradoxical reality that we face. Our society's heightened focus on self-care is indeed actually a signal, a symptom of a deeper ailment, our collective neglect of mental wellness. Royes continues on challenging our self-care perspective. It is deciding how much of our anxiety comes from actualizing our latent potential and how much comes from the way we are being trained to think before we even knew what was happening. Have we inadvertently internalized harmful narratives, trained to think a certain way, be a certain way, caught in a relentless cycle of achieving and improving, often at the cost of our mental peace? So this is me, clearly trying to fake a smile in between opening birthday presents. I had bigger priorities as a young Virgo. Raised the youngest of three by a single immigrant Jamaican mother in a low-income home, it is in my blood to hustle, to be hyper-independent, always be doing something. And so from playing multiple sports in the same season to working multiple jobs at the same time since I was 15, rest, I didn't know what that was. Wasn't even sure I could spell it. And while this hustle allowed me to grow my business to international levels, it's also a hustle that landed me in urgent care with symptoms mimicking a heart attack at the age of 28. A middle school social worker at the time in Newark, New Jersey, building my business on the back end, I was at work one day and began to have strong pains on the left side of my body. As the day went on, the pains grew in intensity up my arm, into my neck, and into my jaw. Eventually, the school nurse said, "Christina, you have to leave now." And so I rushed to the nearest urgent care. They ran all of the tests. Diagnosis: stress-induced anxiety, caused by my internalized harmful narratives. As a society, it's ingrained in us that we don't slow down until our bodies slow us down. And I've worked across the entire lifespan, spending much of my career in the education sector. I've seen these harmful narratives start from so young. I think of college freshman Elijah, who would run away from me mid-conversation to throw open a trash can because he was so overwhelmed by stress. I think of 26-year-old Mia, who was grappling with unhealthy eating patterns, who would nearly faint mid-conversation. I think of college student Amir, young, bright, promising, who's also dealing with a lot of real hardships at home. And when I advised him to seek help at the counseling center, he said, "Miss Broderick, I'm Black. You know we don't go to therapy." Only to report back to my office a few weeks later to tell me that he broke down in the middle of a 300-person lecture hall. I think of 8th grader Isabella, who I was called to rush to the bathroom as she was having a panic attack on the floor due to all the overwhelming anxiety of her schoolwork. And tragically, I think of some like Chloe, first-generation American, first-generation college student, a background similar to mine, who turned to alcohol not as a choice, but as a last resort to cope. drinking a bottle of liquor to herself a day, and needing to take a leave of absence from school to get treatment for her newly developed alcohol disorder. Each of these stories is a stark reminder of the tangible, often devastating consequences of our collective neglect of mental health. And while the names are fake, the stories are real. And they're not just anecdotes. They are urgent calls for change, for us to start taking a more proactive rather than reactive approach to mental health and well-being. Because mental health is defined as the balance between our mental and emotional well-being. It's not just about the absence of a disorder, it's about developing positive traits that we can use consistently. And so no more waiting for that red flag to wave to then start caring about your mental health. So then where do we begin? The change starts with each of us. We recognize our individualistic and our collective responsibility to make a change. No more considering mental health as separate from your organization's mission, but rather integral to your community's success. Instead of relying solely on the counselors and the social workers and therapists, recognize mental health is all of our responsibility, from parents to coaches to managers to political leaders. Because as the saying goes, systems don't change, people change, and people change the systems. And so then how do we keep mental health at the forefront? From our day-to-day occurrences, to weekly team meetings, to standardized curriculum, to policy and legislation. Let's break it down. And so first, as individuals, we must first understand our own perceptions around mental health and begin to develop healthier skills that we can use consistently. As a former therapist turned mental health consultant, I often talk with my consulting clients who are working to become more mental health forward in their programs about a popular therapeutic approach called cognitive behavioral therapy, a practice usually found within the confines of a therapist's office. But the general tenets apply to everyone, in which what we think affects what we feel affects what we do. And you can think about it as a cyclical triangle. You have a thought, I'm not good at this. I'm going to fail. Feeling, discouraged, unmotivated. Actions, you don't try. You give up easily. Thought, I'm worthy. I know that I can figure this out. Feeling, more motivated, more excited. Actions, you give it your all. However, we all often encounter a phenomenon called the negativity bias, in which our brains give more weight and attention to negative experiences than positive ones. When we have a negative experience, we then stress and react to that experience. It then gets locked in our memory, and our brain goes searching for the next negative thing to latch onto. Meanwhile, positive experiences are happening all around us, but they're not given that same amount of weight and attention in our brains. Let me give you an example that I think will resonate with a few folks here today. As I mentioned, I was raised by a single mother, and while we lived in New Jersey, she worked in Manhattan. And so when we came home from school, we had a list of things we had to do. Take the meat out of the freezer, do our homework, do the dishes, clean up our rooms, the usual things. Now, if she came home and that meat wasn't taken out the freezer, boom, negative experience. She now stresses and reacts and goes searching for the next negative thing. Dishes aren't done. Bathroom is not clean. Meanwhile, all of our homework is done. We had to lay out all our books and stack our agenda on top so she can check it. Our rooms are all cleaned up, but it's not recognized by her brain. This is why it's easier for us to complain about that professor or our job or our romantic partners. And this isn't to say that we're start negating those negative experiences, because that was really frustrating that we didn't take the meat out the freezer. But it's about how do we start to have more of a balance of recognition in our brains. Because research says it takes 3 to 5 positive experiences to combat just one negative experience in our brain. This is why things like gratitude journaling are extremely effective. They force us to push the positive to the forefront of our minds to help combat the pesky negativity bias. And so things like becoming more aware of our thoughts, increasing physical movement, becoming more present using mindfulness, can all have a monumental change. For those that are parents, model mental wellness to instill healthy habits early on. And for those that are leaders, advocate for mental health policies that prioritize mental health and well-being. And now for most of us, this actually may be very difficult to do on our own, especially if we are battling generational patterns or there are parts of our mental health that unfortunately we cannot control. But it's important to know that there is help that is available to us. And so as community members, we must come together to address and understand local mental health needs. We must reframe help seeking as an act of bravery to help reduce stigma. We must advocate for mental health education in all of our schools, both alongside and within our traditional subjects. And so having a mental health class that is year-long in every single grade, and using mental health statistics in math class, and reading and analyzing policy in English. We must push for more public resources for more preventative mental health services and programs, which has been shown to lead to a decrease in some mental health disorders over time. And so yes, we want better grades, higher graduation rates, better workplaces, and healthier communities. All doable when we begin to integrate mental wellness into the fabrics alongside our other tactics. And lastly, as a global society, we must double down on research, uncovering the most impactful interventions across cultures and demographics, while also developing a framework of radical compassion for those in the depths of crisis today, realizing that we failed them by not taking mental wellness seriously sooner. Prevention over crisis management must become our new mantra. And so yes, none of this is easy. Change never is. But it is urgent, essential, and doable because as we are all interconnected, a breakdown anywhere impacts everywhere. I'm aware that I've painted a sobering view of the steep costs of our collective neglect of mental wellness, but the future that I urge you to help build looks very different. Where every student can learn, build, and strengthen their mental health foundation along their educational journey, the original mission of my company. Built into every curriculum from kindergarten through high school and to every higher education institution. Picture workplaces where mental health days are embraced as freely as sick days, and where mental wellness is ingrained into the culture, knowing that it enhances rather than detracts from productivity. Where Chief Mental Health Officer is just as common as Chief Operating Officer in the C-suite. And where every organization has a mental wellness department or a program that is just as big and funded as a sales and marketing department. A future where we don't burn through human capital. Where mental health research informs policy just as much as other key areas. Where we openly discuss anxiety coping tips as casually as the weather. And where every planning meeting you have at work includes, and how are we considering the mental health of our community? Whether that's your staff, your students, or the community at large. And where no matter your income level or your cultural background, rest is known as a right and a need and not seen as a privilege. Transforming our approach to mental health may seem daunting or overly optimistic, maybe a little dystopian, but it is absolutely achievable with our collective, concerted effort. So let's revisit the story that I shared at the beginning, where from a young age, life was a whirlwind of activity and constant motion. I thrived in the hustle, or so I thought, until it landed me in urgent care. But here's where the story changes. After that wake-up call, I began to take more seriously the importance of all of my mental health and well-being, understanding who I am and who I want to be. Thanks in part to my therapist, who challenged me to reflect on who I really am. If the overproducing, hyper-achieving is the real Christina, or the Christina that learned to cope. I learned to redefine what success means to me, which includes being able to rest, R-E-S-T, I can spell it now, and valuing my well-being. So today, I stand before you as a testament to the power of taking charge of our mental health and the mental health of our community. While I'm still on my own journey of recovery from my internalized harmful narratives, I share this story to showcase that change is possible. I'm not saying I went through this, so can you. A common, well-meaning, it's sometimes invalidating phrase, because we all have our own life experiences and journeys to navigate, filled with different levels of resource, access, and support. And a lot of us are missing these foundational skills and concepts as it relates to our own mental health. It's what led my company to create our proprietary program to help teach these mental health foundations, which we've had thousands enroll to be able to take charge of their mental health. So I urge you, be proactive, not reactive, because we all have mental health. It is not just there when we are suffering or when we are in need, it is there when we are thriving too. So today can mark the pivot point for a paradigm shift. The choice is before you. Will you plant seeds of greater compassion and well-being in your corner of the world? Or will you continue to uphold this stressful rat race? Will you keep calm and carry on? Or be a part of something greater? Because as the saying goes, if we don't take care of our wellness, we'll be forced to take care of our illness. And so I leave you today with an African proverb, Ubuntu, which is loosely translated to, I am because you are. My humanity is tied to yours. Momentum begins now. Let's get to work. Thank you.